Well, hello everyone, and welcome to MTZCAST episode 15. I'm Ben Winslet with MarchToZion.com, coming to you from Huntsville, Alabama, back from a little bit of a hiatus in our video cast here. Our subject today is one that is a little more of a heavy-hearted subject, one that is born out of sorrow, and that is the subject, specifically, what should be the Christian response to the mass shootings and the violence in America as of late. Now, I just give you the disclaimer up front that this is not going to be a political podcast, because this isn't a political podcast. However, this video cast, unlike our radio program and unlike our Sunday sermons, is one that we discuss things that are current events. And certainly because of the shooting in El Paso and because of the shooting in Dayton, Ohio, this is certainly a subject that's in the news, and I think it would be appropriate to speak to from the Christian point of view, from a Christian worldview. Before we do that, we want to take just a moment and give you a featured resource for this podcast. We always try to give you something extra to go out and look into, something that might benefit you. We share with you this time a video that I have added to our YouTube channel all the way back from 1987. Now, you can find this at our YouTube channel. It's entitled The Way of True Worship, the Story of Primitive Baptists. I think, unfortunately, my browser just tried to reload. But this is a video featuring Elder LaSare Bradley and Gus Harder and Ronald Lawrence and Michael Goins and a couple of other brothers from that era. It's really neat for us to see a probably 40-year-old Ronald Lawrence, and I'm not sure. I don't think Elder Michael Goins was even 30 years old in that video. So probably a decade younger than I am now. That was kind of fun. That was nostalgic, interesting. It's always nice to watch something from the 1980s, isn't it? That looked to be very high-tech, I'm sure, in the 1980s. But in our day and time, it looks like something from the Stone Ages, and it's only 32 years old. Anyway, it's about an hour long, 54 minutes long, and it basically summarizes our belief in the doctrines of grace and our belief on Baptist church history. You find the basic Baptist perpetuity history conveyed in that video in a very summarized, shortened form. But it's worth watching. It was enjoyable. How I came into that, my good friend, Brother Mike Mitchell, had a VHS copy of that, because if you know Brother Mike, you know that he's a man that doesn't turn loose of things, and so he still watches VHS. And like, look, I don't even like watching DVDs. Like, where's the Blu-ray? Do you have this in 4K? So I don't watch a lot of things on VHS, but he had a copy of that, and he asked if I'd ever seen it. I said no. He said, well, I'll loan you mine, but you have to give it back. So I took it, I converted it to DVD, and then I uploaded it to our YouTube channel, so you can watch it there. Again, the story of primitive Baptists. Also, we want to remind you and invite you to this year's Flint River Association. It's going to be held at Flint River Primitive Baptist Church the weekend of the first Sunday in October. We invite you to come and be with us for that service. It's an open meeting. By that, I mean, and I think all Primitive Baptists understand what that means. It means that we don't have an invited minister, as we usually do for our annual meeting. And it's also an association event in that it's a meeting that's a joint venture from the three churches of our association: Hurricane Primitive Baptist Church, Briar Fork Primitive Baptist Church, and Flint River Primitive Baptist Church. We'll begin that meeting the weekend of the first Sunday in October, Friday at 10:30, and we'll continue throughout the day and Friday night, and then we will meet Saturday morning and afternoon and conclude after that afternoon service. So I invite you to come out and be with us. On to today's subject matter, the mass shootings. So whenever one of these things happens in society, whenever we have a mass shooting, first of all, let me just say that we approach this with the utmost respect and sensitivity to people who have suffered loss or who have been caught up in one of those and experienced all of the anxiety and the pain, the post-traumatic stress after being in such an event as that. I could not begin to imagine how that terrifies you for years to come. And certainly that is more and more reality in our cities, that we deal with things like that. What should we think of things like that? What should the Christian's response be to things such as that? What would the Bible say? What wisdom can we gain from the Word of God to help us navigate through this violent age? Now, we talk about the violence of this country, and if you look at statistics, this is something that I did this week. I looked at statistics of U.S. crime, and I looked at statistics of other countries and their crime, some countries that had guns, some countries that did not have guns, and tried to get a full picture of crime. Believe it or not, crime compared to decades ago is actually low. Violent crime is down in the U.S. It's back to the levels that it was in the 1960s. So it rose in the 70s and 80s, and now it's gone back down. So despite what we see in social media, because we hear about everything 30 seconds after it happens, crime is actually down in the U.S. But we studied that and tried to get a grasp on why these things come to pass. What can we do to prevent them? Any life lost in a shooting is one life too many. So even though crime is down, someone lost a loved one this week. And so to them, it doesn't matter what the statistics are, they lost a baby, they lost a husband, they lost a wife, those that died in those tragedies. I like to repeat something that I heard, just comparing this with weather. Here in Alabama in 2011, we had this April 27th tornado outbreak, and I think hundreds of people died. It was very devastating. We had EF4s just plow through the state, and helping people clean up in the aftermath of that, it was just breathtaking, and the pain that people endured was unbelievable. I could not begin to imagine the pain that some people felt after that tragedy. In every major storm after that, people would always ask the meteorologists, is this another April 27th? And one thing that meteorologist James Spann, the Birmingham guru meteorologist, said was, if the tornado hits your road, it's your April 27th. If you are the victim of a shooting, it doesn't matter what crime has done in the country. If someone that you know gets taken away by a horrific murderer, well, to you, it's April 27th, as it were. So regardless of crime and whether or not it's worse or it's better, we need to be very respectful to people who have experienced that loss. Now, when this happens in our country, you see one of two reactions. People immediately run to their camp. So if you're a person of the right-wing perspective, you immediately begin to circle the wagons around your political opinions on guns and the Constitution and gun rights. If you're a hunter, if you're a sportsman, you immediately circle the wagons. And full disclosure, I'm a gun owner, and I'm more on the right end of the spectrum than I am the left end of the spectrum. So we have firearms. We teach our children how to safely use them. We don't demonize the firearm in our house. We teach our kids to hunt when they're young. It's just a part of our culture. It's part of our family. And so just to tell you that up front, I give you full disclosure, that's my position. And you have people on the other position, the other camp, the left camp, that immediately begins to demonize politicians on the other end of the spectrum and blame them for the shooting and say that if there had been legislation banning the type of gun that was used, then the shooting wouldn't have happened. And because Congress won't act, things like this continue to be. And you'll see them demonize the Christians in the country that say, we're praying for you. And they say your thoughts and prayers aren't enough. Give your thoughts and prayers to someone who's mourning the loss of a child. And to me, that speaks very definitively about what some people in this country think about prayer, because you shouldn't demonize prayer. You shouldn't criticize someone for praying. You shouldn't make fun of someone for sending their prayers. Now, our thoughts, I don't send my thoughts. I don't send happy vibes. I don't send positive vibes in your direction. That's crazy talk. That's mysticism. When things like that happen, and I guess the pagans and the mystics feel left out. So since they can't say, I'm praying to the God of the universe for you, they say, I'm sending positive vibes. Well, I'm sorry, your positive vibes aren't going to reach. There's nowhere they can go. There's nothing they can do. They don't even exist outside of your mind. You can't send positive energies at people. But you see a lot of the atheistic and the secular people, the unbelievers, make fun of people for saying, I'm praying for you. And they say your prayers aren't enough. Well, our prayers do impact society. Our prayers do change things. But that's another subject for another day. People, when this happens, they immediately run to their respective camps. Camp 1, the more liberal camp, wants to blame the gun. Camp 2 often wants to focus and shift the conversation towards mental health. So if you watch CNN or Fox News, depending on the political perspective of the pundit that's speaking, some of them will point towards mental health, and some of them will point towards gun bans. Now, concerning gun bans, I get your point. I understand what you're saying. If shootings occur with an AR-15, you might think if you take away the AR-15, well, you won't have any more shootings. The problem with that is it's just not true, because if you take away the AR-15, they'll go get an AK-47. Okay, take away the AK-47. Okay, well, they'll go get an SKS. Well, take away the SKS. Okay, then they'll go get a high point .995. My position is that in this country and in this world, the Pandoras box has been opened when it comes to firearms. So you can't just take away one type of gun and say, now we did something. And sometimes you see people say, well, just do something, anything, experiment. Well, we don't run our lives based on just do something, experiment, whether it works or not. And knowing what I know about firearms and knowing what I know about crime and the history of shootings and all sorts of other things, if you take away one weapon, the criminals just use another. My dad's a retired Birmingham police officer, and I was speaking to him about that this week, that if you take away all semi-automatic rifles, they'll just use pistols. In fact, more people are shot a year with a pistol than with an AR-15 or any other high-capacity rifle. He spoke about criminals that would take sawed-off shotguns. They go buy a cheap pump shotgun from the store, cut the end of the barrel off so it sprays a really wide spread of pellets, and that was something that the criminals would use when he was a police officer back in the 80s. It was very common for them to use against each other in gang violence and in drug violence. And you say, well, why don't they make sawed-off shotguns illegal? They are illegal. You can't buy those. But you can go buy a bird hunting rifle a bird hunting shotgun and cut the barrel off with a hacksaw, and you can't ban hacksaws. And since they're criminals, they don't obey the law anyway. But anyway, I digress. It's my opinion that there's a Pandora's box that you just can't put everything back in the box. You can't undo the fact that we live in a world that has the gun in the world. Now, I look forward to the day that we're all in heaven, and there'll be no need for guns. There'll be no need for shields. There'll be no need for militaries and spears and swords and slings and rocks. There will be no need for any of that in glory. I look forward to that. Another problem with the just take away the tool is that in this country we have the right to bear arms, and that's constitutionally protected. So you can't, and you never will, be able to just eradicate the firearm from society. That's a Pandora's box. Now, concerning the right wing, it's all focused on mental health, and they'll say, you know, we need red flag laws. I'll point out to you that it's already illegal for felons, convicted felons, to own firearms. They can't own firearms. So if you say criminals don't need guns, I think anyone who is a gun owner would agree with you. Criminals don't need guns. If you're a felon, you forfeit your right, a convicted felon, you forfeit your right to own guns. Now, concerning red flag laws, the problem comes in when we talk about red flags. How do you balance a person's constitutional rights to a fair trial and due process and the presumption of innocence? How do you balance that with so-called red flag laws? You're talking about taking away someone's constitutional rights based upon something you think they may do. And now, this is not me endorsing or espousing any of these things. I'm just talking out loud about the things that you hear people say and the futility in either one of those arguments. The problem is we don't know in advance who will break laws. I was reading one of these perpetrators was a very violent person and belonged to a band that gratified, to say this in a modest way, in a G-rated way, they took very graphic links in their music to depict the abuse of women. So these are godless people. These are wicked people. But we don't know who in advance will break laws. I don't know if you've ever seen the Tom Cruise movie Minority Report, but it was about this government agency that had psychics hooked to machines to predict who was going to murder people before it happened, and they would go arrest them right before it took place and incarcerate them. Well, unfortunately, in real life, in the real world, we don't know who's going to do that. And so that's just an impossibility. It would be great to know before they did it who's going to go out and murder people so that we could intervene. And we do have agencies in our country that investigate people, and if there are credible threats that are made, they will try them and prosecute them and incarcerate them. But even then, they can't be incarcerated indefinitely. They're incarcerated for a period of time, and then they're released as their sentence is expired. It's the problem. It's the problem of evil. Now, to get a little ahead of myself, spoilers, spoiler alert, spoiler warning. The Christian is the one in society who can speak definitively on the nature of evil. Why is there evil? Why is iniquity working in the world? Why is there iniquity here? We have the answer to that. And just to give you a little bit of a clue where we're going with this, that is the answer. That's what's wrong. It's evil. Now, another problem with the red flag sort of thing is that we are innocent until proven guilty in this country. That's a constitutional right, and being a constitutional right, it is, according to the laws of our land. And you say, well, why can't we just change it? Because societies are built upon laws, and you can't just take away laws and make it up as you go. Societies are built upon laws, and according to the law of this land, we have the inalienable rights that we have, and of these are that you are innocent until proven guilty. So what should the Christian response be to the recurrent mass shootings that we deal with here in the United States? What should our response be? And we can talk all day about what gun laws we need, and we have a lot of gun laws. It's illegal for a felon to own a gun. It's illegal to own a fully automatic without a special tax stamp, permit, whatever you want to call it, from the federal government. We have gun laws, and there have been various degrees of gun laws in the past. Or do we need to look more at red flag laws? Is that the solution? While everyone else talks about that, I want to share with you what just I believe to be the Christian's response to all of this. And first of all, we turn to the book of Romans chapter 12. The Christian should weep with them that weep. So the first thing that happens, and I know it's hard to stay in this mindset because immediately when this happens, everyone begins to circle their political wagons. But every time something like this happens, we need a season of mourning as a country. We need to weep with them that weep. In Romans chapter 12, it says, "Rejoice with them that do rejoice, and weep with them that weep." The first thing that we ought to do, again, is to mourn that something like this happened. Before people yell at each other, before people start blaming each other, before people start trying to score political points against their opponent because it happened, we need to weep. You know, in the nation of Israel, they had prolonged seasons of weeping, of mourning. When some of their leaders would die, Moses, for instance, you have 40 days of weeping, of mourning. And so we need to cool it. And the worst place, the two worst places are social media and Congress. Could you imagine what life would be like if we walked around acting to one another face to face the way we act online? What a world that would be. People don't act like themselves online. And online is where most of this nonsense occurs, that and Washington. We need to have a season of mourning when something like this happens. We need to weep with them that weep. Before anything else is discussed, we need to wrap our arms around the people who are hurting and do whatever we can to help them. Now, beyond that, we need to grieve the violence. And I think this is a point that needs to be made and clarified repeatedly in our day and age. God grieves the violence. God grieves the violence. In Genesis chapter 6, and this is a place that I turn to often whenever there's a mass shooting or when we have a city ransacked because of looting and violence and rioting, God is not pleased with any of that. Understand the root of that, which we'll come to in a moment. God grieves the violence. Genesis 6, God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. That's an interesting statement. It almost seems like it's repetitious or redundant, but he's just giving the full scope of total depravity in the world. And it repented the Lord that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. That is staggering language. It repented the Lord that he made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Now you skip down and read verse 11. The earth was also corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And so, as you know, the answer to that, God sends a flood and wipes all living creatures off the face of the earth. God grieves the violence. We should grieve the violence. If my arguing point doesn't include the grieving of the violence, somehow I've become misguided. We have to grieve the violence. We have to lament the violence. We not only weep with them that weep, but it ought to make us sad that this sort of violence occurs to begin with. Sometimes it doesn't seem real to us, and we don't understand that this is really happening in the real world. It's not just TV. It's not fiction. It's not a movie. But this happens, and we especially shouldn't glory in it. But it should upset us. It should make us sick that things like that happen. Number 3, we should understand the cause. And this is how we fit in all of this. Where does the Christian fit in the discussion? According to the book of Romans chapter 1, because men reject the notion of the Creator, the earth will be filled with violence. If you wonder, why was the earth full of violence in Genesis chapter 6? Because man had rejected the knowledge of the Creator. Why is there violence in our world today? Because men, society, has rejected the knowledge of the Creator. Now you can read this in verse 18 of Romans 1, we'll begin reading there. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. The word hold there doesn't mean hold as in embrace or hold as in hold to the truth. He's not saying that there are people who hold to the truth, but they're doing it in an unrighteous way. As a shame as that would be, that's not what Paul is writing about in Romans 1. They hold the truth in unrighteous means they suppress the truth. They hold it down. They wrestle it. They pin it down. So they suppress the truth, what truth? Of the Creator in unrighteousness. Now, I like to describe this as a societal conspiracy to suppress the reality of God. So there's this conspiracy from the beginning of time, after sin, to suppress the truth that God exists and to supplement him with something else. Paul says, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, for God hath showed it unto them. If you are a living, breathing organism with a functional brain, you are made in the image of God, and God's existence is proven to you by the very fact that you exist. God has showed you that he exists by virtue of the fact that you exist. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. The reality of the Creator is clearly witnessed throughout all creation. The heavens declare the glory of God, the firmament showeth his handiwork. From the genetic level or the atomic level, the microscopic level, all the way up to the grand scope of the universe, we live in an obviously designed place to support us here. Whether you want to look at the eye or the heart or DNA, whether you want to look at simple things like lightning bugs or woodpeckers with their tongues that wrap around their brain to be a shock absorber. Look, we live in a world that is designed. How did the lightning bug evolve? How did chemicals know to mix? How did random process? How did natural selection? You know, we've really been sold a bill of goods. I've said it many times. If I were not a Christian, I would certainly not be an evolutionist. I would certainly not be an evolutionist. You could not convince me of that notion that by random modifications that we evolved into what we are today, and lightning bugs suddenly decided to glow. Give me a break. Sell somebody else that nonsense. It's not going to be sold here. So creation testifies to the fact that God exists. However, because that when they knew God, that is to say society knew God, they knew God existed in the beginning of time, all men knew God was. They knew who created them. They knew how they got here. If you say, well, the natural man receives not the things of the Spirit of God, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But that doesn't mean early man didn't know we lived in a creation created by God the Creator. What's my proof of that? Namely, Cain. Cain was of that wicked one. Cain was an unregenerate. Cain was a wicked man. Cain was not born of God. And yet Cain conversed with God. Just because someone's unregenerate doesn't mean that they cannot understand that we're living in a creation or that there is a creator somewhere. Now, by faith, we understand the worlds were framed by the Word of God. We believe and embrace because God has dealt unto us faith. He has authored and finished faith within us. But the natural man, because he's made in the image of God, has enough God-given sense to look out at this creation and say, you know what? I don't know where we came from. I don't know who it is, but this has to be a creation, period. Such as Cain, who was of that wicked one. But they, when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. They changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds, and to four-footed beasts, and creeping things. Mankind rejected the concept of God as our creator, And they replaced that. They replaced God in their understanding with idolatry, with idols. And so what happens? Well, when they go towards that and they reject God and they pursue that, God gives them over to it. And this occurs in our world every day. God finally says, okay, that's what you want. You can have it, and everything that goes along with it. And so God gave them up to uncleanness. He didn't cause them to go after uncleanness. He gave them up to it. He lets go of his restraints, and they go towards that which their nature gives them the bent towards, and he gave them up. And so they began to dishonor their bodies between themselves. That's sexual immorality. Who changed the truth of God into a lie and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. That is, again, idolatry. And then we find another step in sexual immorality. For this cause God gave them up unto vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature, and likewise also the men, leaving the natural use of the woman, burned in their lust one toward another. That is homosexuality. So you have the rejection of the Creator, then you have idolatry, then you have immorality, then you have the more extreme forms of sexual immorality. And what do we find after that? God has turned them over to a reprobate mind. Look at verse 29. Being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection. A mother bear protects her children. Without natural affection is what happens in abortion clinics when mothers murder their babies. Implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. God will judge. And that's how this entire tangent began. The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. How is that wrath revealed? In that all men will die. You, me, everybody. We've all fallen short of the glory of God. We are all sinners in the sight of God. We will all die, and without Christ, we would all be cast into the lake of fire. But did you notice how violent this tailspin becomes? Why is it that we live in a world where people shoot each other randomly? Because we live in a world that's given over to a reprobate mind. You know that. I understand that. What is the cause? We understand the cause. The cause is men rejected the Creator. They turned to idols, from there immorality, and then further immorality, and that finally ends in violence. It ends in violence. Why do I say that? This is not a mental health issue. This is not a mental health issue. This is a sin issue. Conservatives on TV all the time. We need greater mental health screening. We need greater mental health screening. We need mental health laws. And that may be true. And if you have a mental illness, then God bless you, go get help for that. Your mind, your brain can be sick, like your heart or your bowels or your kidneys or your lungs or any other part of your body. But we're talking about not just some sort of mental illness. We're not talking about a schizophrenia. And by the way, schizophrenics are usually not violent. We're not talking about depression or anxiety. We're talking about someone who goes into a mall or a school or a government building and murders innocent people. It's the same mentality that flew planes into buildings on September 11th, 2001. September 11th has the same root as all of these mass shootings. And it's not mental health. It's sin. Evil is evil. Now, as you listen to the pundits, understand this. You cannot medicate away evil. We cannot medicate away a person's total depravity, a person's original sin, a person's wicked nature of the flesh. We can't medicate out the wickedness. Now, Does that mean that every wicked person is going to be as wicked as they can be? No. And with that in mind, we'll look at what we can do as a society. There are things that we can do to even constrain the natural man. But saying that this is purely a mental health issue does not go as far as it ought to be taken. This is a wickedness issue. So when things like this happen, instead of saying, we've got mental health problems in our country, and we've got gun problems in our country, so we need to fix mental health and take away guns, and suddenly everything gets better, that doesn't address the problem of evil. It doesn't address the problem of sin. That's the ultimate root of this mess, of this violence. Number 4, as we talk about solutions, as a society, we need to teach respect and dignity to our children. Our children need to know that you are a special creation created in the image of God. And because of that, you are entitled to, you deserve respect and dignity. What is the second greatest commandment? The first great commandment is to love God, all your heart, soul, and mind. Second is to love your neighbor as yourself. God's law demands that we be treated with dignity and respect. Children, adults, the aged. Why? Because we are made in the image of God. Why is it then not right to, this is why then rather, that it's not right to kill another human, and it is permissible to kill a cow, to use its skin for your shoes or your clothes or your jacket, and use its meat to eat. It's okay to take the life of a chicken and eat the chicken. It's not okay to take the life of another person, because the person is made in the image of God. The person is made in the image of God, and because of that, they deserve respect. We need to teach respect in the home. I was contrasting a couple of different countries this past week, and I was looking specifically at countries that had harsh gun laws or strict gun laws. France, for instance, and Japan. Now, in the Western countries, in Western culture, countries like France, cities in the UK like London, they have very strict laws against weapons, but they also have higher crime than countries like Japan. Now, Japan is also a country that has very strict gun laws. So in both cases, you're dealing with countries that have strict gun laws. But in Japan, the crime rate is exceptionally low for a nation of its population size. That caused me to think, why is that? Does it have something to do with the fact that they train honor and respect? Family honor is such an important priority in Japan. Teaching children that there are consequences for actions, making them be disciplined and study academics and music at a young age rather than playing Fortnite and eating chips and tacos all day. Contrast our agenda and goals as Americans versus their agenda and goals as Japanese, and you'll see a great difference in the way they raise their kids, and they don't have this sort of thing happening over there. In fact, in reading of crime in Japan, they have less than 1 million crimes reported in a year. I think I read from 2017, if I read that right, there were less than 1 million crimes that occurred in Japan in that year. We have more than 1 million violent crimes occur a year in the U.S. That's not to mention other types of crimes. And so crime per capita, all types of crime, is far higher over here than it is over there. Maybe we don't do a good enough job of teaching respect to our young people. You say, well, that doesn't matter. That's what mattered in Genesis chapter 6. If you read that carefully, prior to the earth being filled with violence, you had a breakdown of the home. Sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair. They took them wives as they chose. How did Jesus interpret that? In the book of Matthew, in the Olivet Discourse, Jesus didn't interpret that as angels mating with women. I know that's in some of the apocryphal books, and that's nonsense. He didn't interpret that as angels mating with women and having giant children. Jesus interpreted that as men and women giving in marriage. Because when he says in the coming of the Son of Man, it'll be as it was in the days of Noah, or Noe, N-O-E, Noah. They were marrying and giving in marriage. That's what Genesis chapter 6 says. There was a breakdown of the home. We need more respect in this country for each other. We need more respect for human life. And that would go a long way at preventing some of these crimes. People need to understand that they have value by virtue of the fact that they are made in the image of God. I witnessed this very powerfully. I think our last MTZCAST was on the subject of abortion. And shortly thereafter, I went to a pro-abortion rally and did some counter street preaching to that. And at first I stood there alone with a sign, and then I went and stood with other protesters, and then I went and joined some friends from a local congregation, not a Primitive Baptist congregation, but some friends from another local church, and they were going about speaking to people and reasoning with them, doing apologetic work. And some of those people were mad as a hornet. I mean, they were just infuriated and to the point of being violent. But some of those people, when my friend who was speaking with them would look at them in the face and say, "You are worthy of dignity and respect. You're made in the image of God, and I'm sharing this with you because I love you, and your unborn babies are the same. They deserve dignity and respect because they're a human." You could see this look of extreme sadness come over their face because they had never been told by anyone that they're made in God's image. And I think the difference, if you really want to know my opinion on it, in those that were ready to fight over this and those who were humbled and crushed by this, was grace. I think that the Spirit was speaking to the hearts of some of those people, and obviously some of those hearts were desperately wicked. But you could just see this look of almost grief come over their face when they were told that they're made in the image of God and they have worth. We need to understand that we should respect people. And let me just tell you, if you're taught that you are a glorified ape and you're just the top of the food chain and you're not significant, you're a cosmic accident, why then would you think it was wrong to go and kill people? You're nothing but a monkey or a deer or a dog or a pig. Not to go presuppositional apologetics on you, but according to what standard? There's no standard outside of Scripture to say anything is even wrong. So we need to teach dignity and respect of human life, starting in young childhood, and that actions have consequences, that we are to respect one another, and that we are to honor one another. We've lost that. Also, under that subheading, and I'm going to move very, very, very quickly, we need to punish crime harshly in this country. It doesn't take very long after the police have to use lethal force on someone or even have to tase someone. If they have to hit someone or tackle someone, immediately people begin screaming on social media, that police officer should have been nicer to them. Well, the person was punching them and spitting on them. Well, they shouldn't have tased her. That was just wrong. Or, I don't know why they shot him to kill him. Couldn't they have just shot him in the leg? And if you know anything about law enforcement, you know they're not trained to pull the gun and shoot you in the leg. When the gun is fired, it's lethal force. The point is to end the person's life, and it's only permitted if the officer or another person's life is, in their mind at that time, at risk. But we live in this country where people say, that's just mean, they shouldn't do that, that's not fair. Why was the police officer so strict to the person that was spitting on them and slapping them? And you want to put the person in the police officer's shoes and say, what would you do? How would you fix this? How would you respond? If someone came into your house and did that to you, you wouldn't sit there and take it and say, could you please, ma'am, please, we're trying to be nice to you. No, we need to punish people who commit crimes to the full extent of the law, and it needs to be swift. Now, they have their rights, and we all have our rights. We've already talked about that today. But we need to punish crime to the full extent of the law. That's biblical. Ecclesiastes chapter 8 and verse 11, because sentence against an evil work is not executed speedily. Therefore, the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Evil grows in society when evil is permitted in society. And because we don't carry out sentence upon the wicked speedily, we begin to foster this atmosphere of lawlessness. And we saw that in the Ferguson riots. We've seen it in several of the riots. You see it in Congress. You see it among Hollywood, where people get away with sexual immorality all the time, where they abuse people, and it goes on for decades and nobody ever knows. These things continue to happen because they are allowed to happen. And I just remind you, if you are in government and you are watching this today, I don't think anybody from Congress is going to flip over to MTZCAST and watch Ben Winslet from Huntsville, Alabama. However, Romans 13 says, "Sir, you are the minister of God to execute wrath upon evildoers." And when you do that, things will calm down in society. We need harsh punishment. Now, finally, this is to all of us who know the Lord Jesus Christ. We need to be the salt and the light. How are we salt and light? Salt is a preservative. Light shines out and illuminates. It allows people to walk. It allows people to see. Jesus said that we are the light of the world. We are the salt of the earth. How do we do this? We do this by, number one, preaching the gospel. We preach the gospel of Christ to the conversion of his elect. Number two, we do this through sharing the Bible's wisdom on any subject to everyone and anyone. I'm sorry, I apologize on behalf of the body of Christ if you didn't know what I just read from Ecclesiastes 8:11. If you didn't know what I just quoted from Romans 13 or Matthew 5 or Romans 12 or Genesis 6. It is our responsibility to hold forth the word of light. And when we do that, we act as the salt and the light of human society, including our society. So let's do this. Let's put down our smartphones. Let's stop debating for a while. Let's try to do our best to weep with them that weep, to grieve that this occurs in our society, to ignore the trolls and to ignore the haters and to ignore those who capitalize politically in moments like this. And as a society, let's teach respect. Let's teach the value of human life. Let's enforce crimes, enforce laws so that criminals are prosecuted. And as the church, let's share the word of God with the world around us. I thank you for watching MTZCAST today, and we invite you to share this and comment on it, interact with us. Thank you for watching. We love you, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.